Next. So we got to unreasonable searches, didn't we?
Yeah.
And did we mention writs of assistance? Well, remember what I said. In the Bill of Rights, they were directly addressing elements or things that had happened in the past. So the British had deprived them of freedom or took away rights of the press and speech. The issue of slave rebellions, the coroner of truths because of the Townshend Acts and the Coercive Acts. Here, Britain issued what's called writ of assistance. Or a writ of assistance is a blanket search warrant, meaning whatever law enforcement agent had a writ of assistance, they could search anywhere with no questions asked for any reason. Now, the British did it to stop smugglers, but it was a way to intimidate people. You know, they would just basically harass patriots. So that is why this was put in the Constitution. But I think we mentioned this yesterday. There are clearly some loopholes on what unreasonable means. That is very much arguable, and what's probable cause. Once again, I'm getting to this point is these are not blanket rights, and they are not always clear. You'll find out that there's always a lot of gray area in virtually everything. Next, Article 5. I'm sorry, Amendment 5. A lot, right? Let's get to the key elements. You know what a grand jury is? A grand jury, you know what a jury trial is? Well, for a capital offense like murder, it says that for federal cases on big, big crimes, they are not indicted unless a jury indicts them. And that's a grand jury. They indict people. Then they go to court, to a jury trial. So a grand jury, meaning that a grand jury, or that these court cases are so important that they don't want them, you know, as a way to become corrupted, and therefore a jury will make them more sound. Unless in time of war. And have you ever heard of double jeopardy? You cannot be arrested for the same crime twice. That's Fifth Amendment.
Oh, that's
Double jeopardy. But I got to be clear about this. That's why they will charge you with not just one crime. They will charge you with like 10 crimes. So they'll get you with something. And what were we going to say, Chris?
Yeah, that's confusing because if you do this exact same thing 5 times,
No.
you just change
no.
No. Go ahead.
So like O.J. Simpson, he got found not guilty for like the murders in civil court, or not civil court,
Criminal court.
and then in civil court he got found guilty, but he couldn't be arrested because he already was found innocent in the court case.
They couldn't try him again for murder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
But if they had another charge, like for gloves not fitting. Next. Here's another one. You ever seen in a movie they say, or a television show, I plead the Fifth. That's Fifth Amendment. Or compelled in a criminal case to be witness against himself. So that's the Fifth. But here's the most important thing. So you don't have to testify against yourself. You can say, did you rob the bank? You say, I don't have to say, this is Fifth Amendment. And boy, trust me, that's going to come up and it's going to be really controversial, this whole impeachment thing. But also, one more thing. It says here, in order to be deprived of life, liberty, or property, this is what you got to get. Everybody gets due process of the law. Due process of the law. Meaning that you cannot be arrested and held without a trial. They can't just simply take your property without having some kind of legal background. Meaning everybody is under the law. No one is above the law. Okay, that's not quite 100% true, but that was the goal. So due process is the biggie. Everybody's guaranteed due process. All of us in here technically are guaranteed due process. I a little bit more than you, because I'm cool, but also, adult and you're in school, and school operates as your parent. And so you have a little bit less because like a parent has a little more right over children. I know it's kind of weird, but that's just the way the law reads. And so this we have to go through all, don't worry about this for now, but this reinforces habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is in the Constitution. What habeas corpus means, so you have to get habeas corpus now. Habeas corpus means if you're arrested, you must be charged at a trial. You must be charged in a trial. I'll get yours in a sec, Chris. I saw your hand up. Okay. Charged in a trial, meaning they just can't arrest you and hold you, except at time of war. Always at war, so. But that's another story. So habeas corpus is kind of a big deal. They can't just arrest you. That's due process of the law. What's your question?
Will you define a due process of law?
Due process means that everybody has legal rights. Everybody has legal rights. And sometimes these will be called civil rights. We all have certain civil rights. But you notice we don't really, did you catch it? It's throughout the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Did you catch it? There's him and his throughout this. Women are not guaranteed equal rights under the Constitution. It's very vague for women, not for men. Next, since we don't need to know as much about just speedy and public trial in criminal cases, there must be a trial, speedy and public trial, and counsel. You cannot be deprived of counsel. And that includes if you can't afford it. The Supreme Court has ruled in what's called the Gideon decision in '62. You gotta have, or a juror will be tried for you. Oh, I should add one thing I almost forgot. You ever seen, now they do it in every television show involving a police officer and they read some of their rights? That would come about 50 years ago, that decision was made. That's the due process of the law. To read your rights so everybody has guaranteed due process. So back to this. Counsel. Well, that means technically the state will pay for it if you can't afford it, because lawyers are shockingly expensive because of the nature of the job. But of course, it doesn't mean if they're good lawyers, it could be good or bad. That's what life is. And define speedy. 2 years, 5 years? And when it comes right down to the whole concept of time, a decade's pretty speedy, isn't it? So yes, people wait for trials for a long time. They say it's speedy, and they don't always mean it. Next. 7. Oh no, I forgot 6. I forgot 7, didn't I? I said 7, I just flipped it. Remember jury trial? For civil cases too. This is a very long way of saying there could be a jury trial for civil cases, like a lawsuit too. Jury trial for a lawsuit. And let's say $20 ounce, about $2,000. Small ones can be judged. The judge will do a civil case if it's smaller than $2,000. If it's bigger than that, it's then it goes to a jury. So get the point. Trial for criminal, trial for civil. Next, cruel and unusual punishment. That includes excessive fines and bails. So all of these, the British were holding people without trial. The trials were rigged. The trials were public. Here, the British were brutally treating prisoners, and that was the norm. There were no rules on what people did to prisoners. But I'm not going to go into all the details of this. But do you notice how hard it is to define cruel and unusual? And what's cruel, what we might consider cruel and unusual will probably be different than somebody in 1900 or 1800. And you'll also notice, it doesn't say that the more excessive the crime, the more harsh the punishment is. It just says no cruel and unusual punishment. And yet in this country, there's the death penalty for some crimes.
What would be an unusual punishment?
What is unusual? I mean, we can think of a lot of unusual punishments, but, cruel. Everything about prison is kind of cruel. That's kind of the nature of the beast. And the death penalty, by definition, is cruel. Killing somebody is cruel. And some crimes people are horribly treated, and sometimes they're not as poorly treated. All it says is no cruel and unusual punishment for all crimes. So it's a little bit vague is the point. So the last two. The last two are basically dealing with the people and the states. And it says, the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights should not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Meaning, the people have rights beyond the Constitution. The people have rights beyond the Constitution. So, beyond the Constitution means that it doesn't have to be listed or enumerated, and the people have it. And the same with Amendment 10. Powers not delegated to the U.S. government, powers not delegated to the U.S. government, go to the states. So they have all those listed powers, and they go to the states. If all those listed powers for the federal government, then they go to the states if they're not listed. And that is a concept, remember I told you, of federalism having local, state, and and then on top, the federal government.
Wait, we say number 10 again?
All powers not delegated to the US government go to the states. All those enumerated powers that go to the US government, it's not there, it goes to the states. But there's a big problem with this. Yes, this is federalism, but do you remember that clause, that implied powers or elastic clause? Do you remember what that was called also? From the words of the Constitution. You're right.
Proper.
Something improper.
Necessary.
Necessary. That reason.
Yeah.
Necessary and proper clause. Get that down. Write down the necessary and proper clause and put like a question mark or something. Because that greatly expands the power of the federal government.
Necessary.
Yeah, necessary and proper. If it greatly expands the power of the federal government, doesn't that by definition limit the power of the states? So there's going to be this fight in federalism because of necessary and proper, even with the 10th Amendment. I should add, when the Supreme Court ruled that there is an implied right to personal weapons under the Second Amendment, so they totally reread the Constitution in 2010 in a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling, they also went to these two. It's implied because it's not taken away by personal weapons because of the people, and personal weapons under state regulation. So in reality, the argument that people have personal weapons is really a 9th and a 10th Amendment issue. It's not necessarily a Second Amendment issue. You want to catch what I said there? So people talk about the Second Amendment. Sure, you can talk about it all you want, but let's get to this. These are the biggies. So with that, we have to add one more thing. And this is actually really important. I did not put this up here. These powers are only delegated to the national government. They do not yet apply to the states. They do not yet. In fact, it would not be until probably the most important of all the amendments would be ratified in 1867. The 14th Amendment would say these apply to the states, but it would not be until the 14th. So a lot of states had Bill of Rights, but heck, there were still states well into the 19th century that had a religious test for office. Most of them you had to be a Protestant to hold elected office. And that was not seen as unconstitutional. And people forget that. They just assume this applies to the states. This was actually a real big controversial issue. We'll come back to this thing as the years go by. So that's the Bill of Rights. We're still in the Federalist era. Washington is elected president. Who elected him? Who elects the president? He will be the only president unanimously elected. And Madison kind of wrote the Electoral College to elect Washington. He thought it would all go to the House. That's what he just assumed. Madison, or under Washington's 2 terms, we call Washington's president, but they basically created the government. So much of what they did in Washington's 4 years in that Congress, the courts, and Washington himself, we lumped them together as Washington's president, even though he didn't do it himself. But one thing, what do you call the president? They talked about Your Excellency or Your Highness, but doesn't that sound like he's a what? Yeah. So they said, Mr. President. Now, he still thought he has to keep some separation. So he would just bow to people. He would not shake their hands. Or he was very aloof. Jefferson would be the first American president to shake hands with common people. Now, if you watch presidential campaigns, what do? You know, they're shaking hands and all that, but is a different world. A couple others. He would end up only serving 2 terms. It wasn't constitutional, but no one else would serve more than 2 terms, even though a few wanted to do it. But no one would do it until what president would be elected for 4? Who? FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt, 4 terms. One of the, hard to find a more important president than Roosevelt. And they set up the court system. Congress would pass the Judiciary Act. We still follow that basic court system. We just have expanded it. Supreme Court, Federal Court, Court of Appeals. The Judiciary Act. Set up that system, still used today. Despite all the changes in society, the law basically still stays the same. Next, the Constitution says there'll be a cabinet, and the Senate will advise and consent. Well, they turn advise and consent to literally a vote called confirmed. All high-level government officials, especially the cabinet, will be voted on by the Senate. That's called the confirmation confirmation process. And same thing with judges and all presidential appointments. And then lastly, Washington gave a farewell address. And he laid out his his term, but also his future predictions. And Washington's going to make two really big warnings. We'll get to them when we get on Washington's term. Because by the end of Washington's term, he is going to be called a traitor and a monarchist and every name in the book. That's how bitter it got in just 8 years from being unanimously elected. He's the only president. One other president got all but one vote. James Monroe, 1820. So, with that, here's quickly the cabinet. Gotta mention the cabinet. Now there are over 20 cabinet level posts if you count a few that aren't necessarily secretaries. But this is the first one, the State Department, and that's Thomas Jefferson. Now the State Department's foreign affairs. It wasn't then, now it is, the way it is. The Attorney General was Edmund Randolph. Here's Jefferson and Randolph, and both are from Virginia, just like Washington. Henry Knox, who ran Washington's artillery, Knox right here. War was just the Army. They would make a separate Navy department, and then in 1947, those would be combined into the Department of Defense. And then lastly, the Treasury. Washington's aide, a war hero, but also incredibly controversial. Nobody really liked the guy, Alexander Hamilton. And there, Hamilton standing for whatever reason, doing the, well, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but they're all doing it. You want me to tell you now? You ever seen the fake why they do this? And Napoleon, for propaganda purposes, had so many paintings. People think of Napoleon where they put their hand inside their coat. You know why? Hands are hard to draw. It's very simple. I spent years as a portrait artist, and so I can tell you. Because look, I could draw a perfect face, and then you got a hand that's difficult to draw. Lamb walrus, easy. So with that, one thing I should add, immediately, the elites, Jefferson and Hamilton, would be bitter oppositions. They had a totally different viewpoint about the future of the country, and this divide would set up the situation for the first two real factions, aka political parties, right in the cabinet. And I should add one thing, and please add this for Jefferson. I didn't put a slide there, put Jefferson down. Jefferson's vision for the future was for farmers, small farmers, agrarian society, free people, independent, owning their own land. He saw that as the most free society. If you own your own piece of land, you're beholden to no one else for your livelihood. And that was Jefferson's ideal. A country made up of free, white landholders. I should add, that's why he's going to be obsessed with land. Now, you notice Jefferson said, my vision, small farmers. Yet he was a large plantation owner with over 200 slaves. So once again, there's a contradiction of Jefferson. My idealized version, but I still want to live my nice life. He is filled with contradictions.
Thomas Jefferson, the one with like orange hair or whatever?
Yeah, he had red hair. He had red hair.
Oh, God.
And he had a lot of redheaded slaves.
Oh.
Moving on. Hamilton's vision. Okay, so you're like, oh. And if you're not sure what I mean, once again, go talk to your health teacher. So, Hamilton's vision. Hamilton was radically different. Hamilton saw an entire reshaping of the country. And it'll be Hamilton's vision that will divide into factions. There'll be 4 parts of his vision. That will be the first political parties, and not 100% because times change, but you still see many of the same political divisions as today. He would write 2 pamphlets, one called the Report on Credit and the other Report on Manufacturers. And that laid out his vision, Hamilton's vision. His report on credit was this. For a country to survive, it has to have good credit. The United States needs to be able to borrow money. The report on manufacturers laid out Hamilton's idea that the future of the country is not agrarian, it is urban, and it's based upon industry. Has everyone got that? Industry. And industry means cities and banking and finance. And what country did he look to as a model?
Great Britain.
Yeah. Ironic, the man who would be a hero in the Revolutionary War, be horribly wounded at Yorktown, leading an attack on a British fort, and yet idolized Britain. Because Britain was just beginning the Industrial Revolution. No, he had no idea exactly what that meant. They were only guessing. Britain was going through just convulsions at this time. The US will go through these convulsions in the 1830s, 1840s. That literally would change the world. But we're not quite there yet. So here is Hamilton's financial program from an old textbook, page 41 of some old American history textbook. I just thought that was pretty funny for a lot of reasons. Talks about its various ideas of bank and the treasury. But this is my favorite. Levying an excise tax on distilled liquor. So here's Uncle Sam with a gun collecting from this poor shirtless whiskey maker with a coonskin hat. So I just find that hilarious. Here is the shirt, coonskin hat. That means whiskey production. So, oh, we're not there yet.
Didn't Thomas Jefferson?
Don't write this down.
Didn't Thomas Jefferson base his what he wanted after France?
He admired France more, but not really.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, he admired France, and he admired the French Revolution. But he didn't really. He did not. France was controlled by big landholders, so he didn't want that. But he admired France in the French Revolution. So there are four things. The first one I got to do on the board because I got to draw lots of arrows. And it's number one of the four things that would divide through Hamilton's vision. He would propose through his allies in the United States House a bill called, okay, it's called either the Debt Assumption Bill, we're getting to the bus too, the Debt Assumption Bill, or simply, most people just called it the Assumption Bill. The Assumption Bill. Assumption as in terms of assume. And this would be a radical transformation of society. This was not just a bill to assume debts. This would put Hamilton's entire vision of a brand new, radically different country than any other country in the world. Hamilton was incredibly farsighted. Now, didn't mean he was correct in the side, but had this grand vision and diabolical. I mean, absolutely cunning in the way he did this. And so, what's the big issue was debt. Everybody was in debt. And the big thing was, we had old colonial debt, continental debt, from the old Continental Congress, continental debt. The brand new states had debt, and the Confederation had debt. Everybody had debt, every level, and they were having real difficult time paying off these debts. Debts are done in bonds. Not just one bond, all the bonds. And you better get 4 lines under this, because this is important. One thing I do on the board, I have no idea why. Sometimes I decide to underline things and sometimes I don't. Like, why did I decide to underline Confederacy here? The Continental? No, I don't care. All right, so bonds. Bonds are where governments borrow money. And so in the United States, the Treasury Department, they literally sell bonds. And in a certain amount of time, the government will pay back the bond. You come back with your bond, it's called when the bond matures. And you come back with your bond and literally present it to the Treasury Department, and they will give you money for that bond. So they'll repay you what you bought for, plus what? Say it again? Interest. And that's the key element that Hamilton's talking about. Interest. Interest rates. the thing is, all these things that made up what's going to become the United States, all those entities couldn't pay back their debt. And there was a real worry, maybe the new United States couldn't pay back their debt. And so if the new United States might have to pay back their debt, what's going to happen to interest rates? And people believe, now they might not be here tomorrow, what happens to interest rates? Has everyone got that? Interest rates go up if they believe that the country won't pay back its debt. AKA, if you got bad credit, you got to pay more interest. Has everyone got that? That is a key element. If you got bad credit, you got to pay more interest. So they charge more for borrowing money, a lot more. This so much depends on this. It's one of the things, people talk about leaders and governments and battles. Just like inflation and deflation, so much matters on that interest rate. So Hamilton wants this interest rate to go down to make it easier to borrow money in the future. So Hamilton wants that to go down. So what did he do? I'm forgetting something. Oh, so for example, we built 3 new schools in Helena School District in the last few years. By the way, has anyone looked at them?
Yes.
Some are, huh?
What?
They are so
Some
look, the one I gotta say is,
Yeah.
except for Central. Some streets just seem a little bit out of place. The rest of them look, but they're pretty amazing. And we go to this thing that's
The temperature in the building is controlled by climate from the outside. The temperature, how they regulate
Yes.
temperatures and stuff.
Those were fun.
No, they do. It's actually pretty cool. They've got a bunch of neat little elements in there that, of course, we don't deserve. So, but what happened is the school district, this has to be a vote. So the people voted for the school district to borrow money. How do they do it? The school district issued bonds. And that's how, and so the school district will pay that back plus interest. Yeah.
My question really was, with the interest, well, the Fed sets the rates for this, so how it handles it.
Not for, see, the Federal Reserve can set a rate, it's called the federal funds rate, but it's what banks loan each other money. And so that will kind of have a regulatory effect on it, but it doesn't necessarily set it. And the other thing is this, that's for short-term loans. This rate is long-term loans. In fact, it's directly tied to like the mortgage rate, long-term things. So the Federal Reserve can have effect, but not really control it. So when they say the Federal Reserve sets rates, it's more like a very strong suggestion. So with that, what do we call U.S. debt now? The bonds, okay, the generic name is bond. Do you know what they call U.S. government bonds? They actually have a name for it. You might have heard this, anyone? Have you ever heard them say treasury bills or T-bills? They'll say interest rates on T-bills. So a treasury bill. And I will get to that again now, but it's a good thing to know if I mention it again, but a treasury bill. By the way, is U.S. interest high or low on treasury bills now? Meaning the U.S. government. It's so low, it's shocking. It's almost free money to borrow money for the U.S. government. If the U.S. government's going to borrow money, this would be the time. There's even lower rates a while ago. Now, there's lots of reasons why, but the biggie, the U.S. always pays back its debts, always. If people begin to believe that the U.S. won't pay its debts back and they don't believe the money, so the money might not be worth as much, rates start going up. Or if the economy gets good. Because what happens is people who have money, let's say, this is a problem I bet a lot of you have. You have $1 million right now, right? Who has that problem? $1 million just burning a hole in your pocket. You don't know what to do with it, right? Who has that problem, right? We all do, kind of, right? In fact, I'll tell you what, give me your $1 million and I'll invest it for you. I will keep it secure. You can trust me. You can also use the word secure. Think about if you have $1 million. Just, okay, so you have a pile of $1 million. Here's $1 million $1 bills. If you put that out in the middle of your yard, by definition, that's not secure. Or you put it in your mattress, or you carry it around in your pocket. Or you say, hey, I trust that Partridge guy. I'm going to give him all my money, and he promises to invest it as soon as he gets back from Cancun. So, if you have money, it's insecure if you just have it out, if you got extra money. Now, this is a problem that most people don't have. Most people don't have a lot of extra money. But just imagine we do. Don't you want a place to keep it secure? It's insecure out in the open. That's what Hamilton wanted. Hamilton wanted people to think government bonds were secure. You can invest. And that is why you might have heard this term before. They call bonds, sometimes stocks, and other things securities because it keeps it secure. So the government agency that sometimes regulates the stock market is called the Securities and Exchange Commission. Commission. So who has a bank account? Who has a savings account? Oh yeah, all of you. Well, pretty much all of you. You know what you did? You loaned the bank money. And then the bank gave you a little piece of paper saying we promise to pay that back if you come ask for it. Then what do they do with that money? They loan it out or use it as collateral to borrow more money, that kind of thing. Yeah, they're hoping all of you don't come at the same time and borrow your money. That's what we call a bank panic. But that's the same thing. That's a security. That little piece of paper that says you have a deposit, that's a security too. It's all the same thing. So let's get back to this. So he wanted to do this. How he's going to pay it back was, his plan was to pay back all of this debt at 100% value. Whatever it's worth at 100%. I'll get to more of this in just a second. And how is he going to do it? An excise tax on whiskey. A tax on whiskey production. And that would accumulate the money to pay back all of this debt. And therefore the US will get good credit. An excise tax just adds to the cost. And when Jefferson saw this, and Madison, the Speaker's House saw this, their reaction was, that's an interesting plan to reduce the debt. No, you know what their reaction was? Oh my God, Hamilton has got to be stopped, he's evil. Because they read the rest of Hamilton's reports, and they realized this. Whiskey was grown by small farmers. I can't believe I said that. They had whiskey trees, and they grew whiskey. That's where whiskey comes from. Big, huge trees. Now, where do they get whiskey from? What product? Corn. Now, shipping corn to market, especially when you don't have roads, is really difficult. But if you convert bushels of corn into a barrel of whiskey, you get a lot more money for whiskey. This was a way for small farmers to make money. Small farmers, in fact, they were so cash poor that whiskey became a form of currency on the frontier. Whiskey became a very important element of small farmers. By the way, who kind of like small farmers? Jefferson. And one more thing about this. What would this tax do? Hamilton's plan wasn't just to tax them. Hamilton's plan was, farmers are always in what? Say it again?
Rural parts.
Well, they're in the rural parts. But do they have money? They're always in debt, aren't they? Just imagine what happens if they get even less money for their whiskey. They can't pay back their debts, and what happens to their farm?
It's taken away.
Huh?
It's taken away.
They lose their farm. And what becomes of them? They become desperate, starving people who have no choice but to go to where?
Cities.
The cities. And do what?
Industrial parks.
Okay, they're not going to start the factories because they're poor.
Working at the factory.
They're going to be the wage earners in factories. They'll go from being free and independent farmers to earning this god-awful thing called a wage. Wait, and they're no longer independent, meaning they are wage slaves. That's what Jefferson saw them at. By the way, isn't it amazing that we now all accept wages now? That's a good thing. People had to be beaten into submission to accept that.
Mr. Partridge,
The answer is no.
I was gonna ask to go first.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't